Hey, and welcome back to another video. Today I'm going to talk to you about this project that I've been embarking on for the last little while, and I'm hoping it's something that you all find interesting. So without further ado, let's get into it. So basically this all starts with the Final Fantasy series of video games, right? The Final Fantasy series of games are some of my favorites of all time. Final Fantasy 8, 11, and 14 are some of my absolute favorite games I've ever played. Even the ones that aren't on my top list are still pretty high up there. Games like Final Fantasies 10 and 12 are huge for me. And late last year, I was thinking about the Final Fantasy series, thinking about the things I like about it, and really thinking about the games that are in it. Because specifically, I was thinking about how I have liked almost all the ones since I started playing. And for reference, the first one that I seriously played was Final Fantasy VIII. I'd played a little bit of Final Fantasy VII on like a demo disc or something, if that tells you how old I am. But after that, I've played every single Final Fantasy game, and for the most part, liked them. There have been bits and challenges, but generally I've played all of them. Especially nowadays when there's remakes and releases and things like that, which there just weren't in the older days. But as I was thinking about it, I started to think, well, hold on. I've played almost all of the ones after 8. I've played a lot of them for a really long time. But how many of the games have I actually played? Actually spent a lot of time on, actually finished? And when I thought about it, I started counting and started thinking about it. And really, what I ended up coming up with was I've only really played about 8 of them. And that goes from about 8 to 15, give or take a little bit. And so for me, one of the things I thought was like, okay, well, I've played a lot of the back half of the series. I've played 8 and loved it. I played 10 and loved it. I played 12 and loved it. But that doesn't mean I've played a lot of the original games and the earlier parts of the series. And especially some of the more recent Final Fantasy games really haven't been ones that instantly grabbed me. 13 was not really my favorite. 15, I've yet to finish. And so I got to thinking, well, why don't I actually play those games that I haven't played, right? Um, and the more I thought about it, the more fun that sounded. Like, hey, just go and play all the Final Fantasy games. And so I made a plan to do something about it. And like for some people in the world, that plan revolved around New Year's, in the form of a New Year's resolution, essentially. And of course, it turned 2020, which has been horrible, but the resolution still stood. So, as I was going into the new year, I made this plan that this was going to be my year of Final Fantasy. I was going to play as many of the games, play them as far as I could, and see how far I could get. And when I thought about it more and more, I really narrowed it down to main series Final Fantasy games. So, of which that are not MMOs, there are 13. So I figured 13 games, 12 months, see if we can do it, right? I specifically left off Final Fantasies 11 and 14. I love both of them. I still play them, but it doesn't really make a lot of sense to play them all the way through or play all their content because it's A, much longer than most Final Fantasy games, I would imagine, but B, doesn't end. So by the time I would finish it, there would just be new content, and then I would just never, actually finish the game. But rest assured, I will play them nonetheless. But basically, I looked at this and I said, hey, let's do this. And I thought, okay, how am I going to do this? So the plan I developed from just play the games became play them in order of release. Start at Final Fantasy 1, go all the way to Final Fantasy 15 if I can make it. Play them one at a time, so don't, jump back and forth because that's one of the things I get in trouble with. I've started Final Fantasy 9 a couple times and not gotten through it. I've started Final Fantasy 7 a couple of times and not really gotten through it. So stick to one at a time. The main focus for me here is story completion. So some of that will be easier than others. The earlier Final Fantasy games are much shorter than the later ones. So, I assume that the later ones are will get bogged down to some degree. And the other big thing here is just using whatever copy I happen to have at hand. For some of these games, I have older copies, not the originals. So Final Fantasy like 1 and 2, I have the Dawn of Souls copy versus the original cartridge on, the original format. But a lot of them too, I have on PC through Steam or through some sort of re-release or something or other. So a lot of them I'll be playing a more modern version or a re-released version, which tend to have bells and whistles and all those things. But try not to spend too much money here, right? Don't go buy original cartridges on systems you don't have, right? Um, so now that I've thought about this, I can foresee some problems with the plan. So the first one is that there's simply too many main series Final Fantasy games. By my counting, there's 13 story-driven main ones that are not MMOs, and that's a lot of games. 13 games, 12 months. I've got a full-time job. I don't know if I'm going to be able to do that. So that's a problem. Another thing I can foresee, I've heard this from a lot of people, especially with the more modern re-releases, that some of the games have inconsistent quality in terms of their reimaginings or their re-releases. So I'm very curious to see what that looks like and if that impacts my experience at all. Because I could very well see if the game doesn't look or sound good or whatever it is. If I can't do something about it, I might not want to play that game that much. I can also very easily see that I will probably like some of the games more than others. I know that already because I've played about half of them, a little more than half of them. I like some of them more than others. So I think some of the games that maybe I'm inclined to like less are going to be much more of a slog. And I could see that being kind of hard to, actually finish those. The other thing, too, that occurs to me is there's lots of side games that I might like more than some of the main games. So, for example, there's, side and spin-offs and, expansions and things like that. I believe some of them would be things I would like more than certain main series games. So, for example, I've played Final Fantasy X-2 before and do like that game, while I've played some of the later series, more modern games, and not liked them as much. So it could be very easy for me to be like, oh, I played this game, I'll play this other one that's related. So I could see very easily getting distracted that way. So with that being said, I want to welcome suggestions to this. I've already played a lot of the games by the time you're seeing this. But if you have ideas of like what version should I play, what think strategies should I use, what things should I do to experience it, I'm specifically interested in maybe in knowing that I might not actually finish the whole series. What should I do if it looks like I'm not going to? I've personally thought just get through as many of them as I can in order, and then, if I don't play some, I don't play some. But it does occur to me that I've played very little of the early games and a lot more of the later ones. So maybe do I start prioritizing games that I haven't played or haven't finished? I'm curious what you all would think about that. Would it be better to have a brand new experience versus replay an old game, even if I'm maybe much more inclined to play the old game? So anyway, let me know. I plan in the future to put forth a video that talks a little bit about where I found myself on January 1st or on New Year's as I started this. But with that being said, thanks for watching, and I hope to see you all in the next one.